Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour tonight. Healthcare in America. The Biden administration makes changes to the availability of care, including reopening the insurance marketplace in response to the pandemic. Then, staying safe from COVID, we examine evolving recommendations on masks, social distancing, and ventilation for avoiding exposure to the coronavirus. And help wanted. Despite rising salaries, a shortage of skilled tradespeople gets worse by the day as an older generation of workers retires.
You're doing manual labor. Some people tend to look down on that, and that makes people not want to go into it, clearly.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
Before we talk about your investments, what's new?
Audrey's expecting.
Twins.
We'd be closer to the twins.
Change in plans.
At Fidelity, a change in plans is always part of the plan.
Consumer Cellular. Johnson & Johnson. BNSF Railway. The Kendeda Fund, committed to advancing restorative justice and meaningful work through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. More at kendedafund.org. Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Help for health care. That issue topped today's agenda at the Biden White House. Correspondent Yamiche Alcindor has our report.
Today, President Biden focused on his campaign pledge to strengthen Obamacare.
There's nothing new that we're doing here other than restoring the Affordable Care Act and restoring the Medicaid to the way it was before Trump became president.
In the Oval Office, he said that effort is more urgent than ever.
Of all times that we need to reinstate access to, affordability of, and extent of access to Medicaid is now in the middle of this COVID crisis.
His first action, expanding enrollment. Beginning February 15th, healthcare.gov, the federal online insurance marketplace, will open an additional sign-up period. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that 15 million uninsured Americans are still eligible for that coverage. But in December, the regular enrollment window closed, and former President Trump declined to reopen it.
What we want to do is terminate it and give great health care.
During his term, Trump repeatedly took steps to try to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. And there's a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court that could lead to its demise. Meanwhile, President Biden has also ordered action to roll back other Trump policies, including work requirements in some states as a condition for low-income people to enroll in Medicaid. And the president moved to reverse two policies on abortion. He rescinded the so-called global gag rule that bars U.S. funding for health groups abroad that offer abortion counseling. And he directed steps toward restoring federal funding for Planned Parenthood and other groups making abortion referrals in the U.S. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, two of the new president's cabinet nominees made pitches for the new economic stimulus. There was Ohio Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, nominated for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She told her Senate confirmation hearing that full recovery requires greatly expanded housing aid.
Whatever it takes, we cannot afford to allow people in the midst of a pandemic to be put in the streets. I just believe that extraordinary times take extraordinary action.
Cecilia Rouse, tapped to head the Council of Economic Advisors, defended the Biden plan to spend $1.9 trillion.
If we don't, we run the risk of actually finding ourselves in a downward spiral, because the capacity to deal with our debt is not only the amount that we spend, but the size of our economy.
Today, Democratic leaders said that if Republicans refuse to support the stimulus plan, they will try to push it through anyway. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Yamiche Alcindor.
In the day's other news, a more contagious version of COVID-19 from South Africa has arrived in the U.S., with 2 cases confirmed in South Carolina. The news came as the nation's COVID death toll passed 432,000, and the Attorney General in New York State reported that nursing home deaths were undercounted by up to 50%. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio demanded answers.
We have to make sense of this. We have to get the full truth, and we have to make sure it never, ever happens again. Nothing like this happens again. And we have to be honest about the numbers.
Other COVID variants from Britain and Brazil have already reached the United States. The U.S. Commerce Department says that the economy shrank 3.5% last year as the pandemic raged. That is the most since the nation demobilized after World War II. Growth resumed in the third quarter, but it has slowed since then. Last week, another 847,000 Americans filed for unemployment benefits. At least 6 people were killed today when liquid nitrogen leaked at a Georgia poultry plant. It happened at a Foundation Food Group site in Gainesville. A number of other people were injured, 3 of them critically. Liquid nitrogen is used in refrigeration, but it can vaporize and force the breathable air out of enclosed spaces. In Pakistan, a man convicted and then acquitted in the beheading of American journalist Daniel Pearl in 2002 may be going free. The country's Supreme Court today ordered Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh and 3 other men released. In Washington, the White House condemned the move.
This decision to exonerate and release Sheikh and the other suspects is an affront to terrorism victims everywhere, including in Pakistan. But we call on the Pakistani government to expeditiously review its legal options, including allowing the United States to prosecute Sheikh for the brutal murder of an American citizen and journalist.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. will try to extradite Sheikh if his acquittal stands. General Motors plans to make most of its new vehicles electric by 2035. The automaker also announced today that its entire operation aims to go carbon neutral by 2040. GM sold more than 2.5 million vehicles in the United States last year. Only 20,000 were electric. On Wall Street, stocks made back some of Wednesday's big losses. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 300 points to close at 30,603. The Nasdaq rose 66 points, and the S&P 500 added 36. And the nation's very first second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, stepped out today. The husband of Vice President Kamala Harris had his first solo event, touring a Washington nonprofit that advocates for food security. His appearance came as Merriam-Webster added second gentleman to its dictionary. Still to come on the NewsHour, reaction to the Biden administration's major changes to medical care. We examine the latest recommendations for avoiding exposure to the coronavirus. Former President Trump continues to exert control over the Republican Party, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Let's look more closely now at the changes and orders President Biden announced today in health care. As Amna Nawaz explains, the moves are designed to expand coverage and reverse some of President Trump's actions on abortion and family planning.
Judy, a key part of one executive order signed today will reopen enrollment for the Affordable Care Act, what many call Obamacare. Mr. Biden's other executive action will revoke the Mexico City policy, often known as the global gag rule. That rule barred U.S. funding for groups overseas that performed abortions or offered information about them. Covering all of this for The Washington Post is Paige Winfield Cunningham, and she joins me now. Paige, welcome to the NewsHour, and thanks for being here. We reported earlier on some of the details around those executive actions. Let's talk about the impact, though. On this first move, reopening enrollment for the ACA from February 15th to May 15th at healthcare.gov. People know that site does not reach every state, right? So how many people and who exactly is the Biden administration trying to reach with this?
Right. Well, as you say, they opened healthcare.gov. There are more than a dozen states that also run their own marketplaces instead of using the federal website. And most of those states have also announced that they're going to be opening their enrollment for that limited time period going up to May 15th. And that's coming. Those announcements have come from California, Minnesota, many of the large states that run their own marketplaces. So really, this decision is going to apply to the vast majority of people in the United States. And what's interesting about this is the pandemic is the reason that the president is citing for doing this. But I actually think the bigger impact is going to be around the timing of this. For years, tax experts have actually said you could maximize enrollment in health coverage if you aligned tax filing season with ACA enrollment. And that's because a lot of lower income people who might be eligible for subsidies but might have trouble affording premiums, if you align that when they're filing their taxes and getting tax refunds back, that could actually help incentivize them to enroll in coverage at the same time. I've talked to analysts who are estimating that this could result in potentially tens or hundred thousands more people enrolling in health coverage over this 3-month period.
Let me ask you about the other executive action then again that's getting a lot of attention. President Biden's decision to rescind the Mexico City policy. That, of course, dates back to the Reagan administration. It's ping-ponged depending on who's in power, Democrat or Republican. But what is the practical impact of rescinding that policy today?
Well, you're right that this has ping-ponged back and forth a number of times between Democratic and Republican presidents. I think there's even a bigger impact at this point, and that's because when the Trump administration put in that policy in place 4 years ago, it actually made it even broader than what previous Republican presidents had done. It basically put this ban on referring for abortions or counseling about abortions, not just on international aid funding focused on family planning, but on all international aid funding, which total billions and billions of dollars. And so now by reversing this, it's really removing restrictions from many, many nonprofits who had been forced to comply with these rules over the last 4 years.
There was a related memo President Biden signed as well, asking HHS to review a Trump rule that cut off federal funds for groups here in the United States that did provide abortion services as well. What could that review lead to?
Yeah, you're right. So we're talking about their Title X family planning funding. And the step that Trump administration took was a really unprecedented one in banning participants in that program from counseling or referring for abortion services. And it actually had a very practical effect in that Planned Parenthood, which is, of course, the nation's largest abortion provider and, of course, a huge provider of contraceptive family planning services, withdrew from that program. That was back in 2019. And so now what you're going to see with this is probably HHS is going to probably come out with a new funding announcement, which welcomes these providers back into the program and reverses that previous guidance.
Paige, I have to ask you, with the previous administration, when you looked at some of their unilateral moves on health care, they ended up in court, a lot of them, right? Immediately challenged by Democratic officials. And we've seen that already with this new Democratic president. When you have an immigration move, one related to deportation he took earlier, you saw a Republican attorney general step in, challenge it, and a Texas court pause it. When you look at these moves made today, are we likely to see a lot of them end up in court?
It depends on, I think, on whether he's forging new ground here. With a lot of these things, he's rolling back really unprecedented things that the Trump administration had done. One thing we haven't talked about yet is what the past administration did on Medicaid. And they had really taken the unprecedented step of allowing states to put in place new requirements for enrollment, such as work or volunteering requirements, or allowing states to get block grants. That was something that we hadn't seen done previously to the Medicaid program. And so you're really going to see the new administration pull back on that. But I certainly would not rule out the possibility of litigation here. We're going to see the new administration do a wide variety of things, not just things around health insurance, but also having to do with discrimination in healthcare, other things with reproductive rights, which are obviously very controversial.
Very briefly, Paige, you mentioned that some of these moves are controversial, but are there areas for a president who says he wants to move forward with bipartisan support? Are there some areas you think there could be that support in Congress?
Well, the president really is someone who likes to bring about consensus, and this is what he said. Over the last couple of years, I've tracked, especially with efforts in Congress to pass reforms to lower drug prices, and this is something you've seen leading Democratic and Republican senators work together on. We've seen some bipartisan legislation. So I wouldn't rule out that this might happen, but, it all depends really on kind of how how Democrats roll the dice and whether they decide it's going to be to their advantage to try to rope in Republicans and do something bipartisan, or try to pass something much more ambitious, which they can't get Republicans on board with, but then sort of use to hammer them with politically.
Paige Winfield Cunningham of The Washington Post. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It is a common refrain right now: anger, frustration, anxiety. More than 25 million shots of a COVID vaccine have been given out in the U.S., or about 8 doses for every 100 people. But the process of getting that shot can be difficult and overwhelming. We wanted to capture a sampling of what Americans say they're facing.
My name is Nora Galina. I live in Zephyr Hills, Florida.
My name is Andrea Shiloh, and I'm in Houston, Texas.
My name's Helen Marshall. I live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania.
My name is Kareem Deans, and I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I teach middle school theater in St. Louis right now.
My name is Susan Daniel, and I'm in Dallas, Texas.
My name is Jason Munn, and I'm a letter carrier from Brentwood, New York.
I try every day, multiple times a day, to see if an appointment has opened. Every hour, basically, until I go to bed. Even sometimes at midnight.
At this point, I've tried 6 different branches of one supermarket, and I've tried 4 pharmacies, and I've tried 3 hospital systems and gotten nowhere.
I've been trying, unfortunately, unsuccessfully, to get the vaccine for myself and my mother. As her primary caregiver, her only caregiver.
Information is scarce about this. I'm worried that I might not get the vaccine because of the fact that I may have missed some bit of information somewhere.
Even if my appointment were for next month, I don't care. Even if my appointment, 6 o'clock in the morning, I don't care. I will get up, I will wait, and I will go to it. But I just want to know that there's something, that I can get something. That's my biggest frustration.
Having to drive 100 miles to get a simple vaccine was just one more thing piled up on what has been a very, very difficult year for everyone.
My mom is 97 and a half years old, and she was diagnosed with dementia 2 decades ago. Every day I think about the vaccine. Every day I think about COVID-19. Every day I have a conversation with someone or some exchange about it. It's like the albatross sitting on my shoulder.
We went out and we kept the economy running in New York State. And now it feels like we're completely forgotten. And I am in no way expecting us to go to the front of the line. And I don't think we're heroes, but we did do a brave thing, and it was noble, and we worked very hard.
Our family in Oklahoma City has a son with special needs, and he is especially susceptible or at risk with the virus, and that has been a very, very big concern for them. They have told us that it's been the hardest year of their life.
It's hard because I know there are people that we're not going to see again. I'm already missing one friend who was in a nursing home and contracted COVID.
I want to hug my family. And I think having the vaccine brings me closer to that goal. It's a race to the luckiest or the swiftest on the computer. I think a lot of luck is involved in the process.
After what I read this morning, I'm hoping that I will get it before June, frankly. I just keep telling myself it'll happen eventually. So hopefully we'll make it.
So tough. And there is at least some good news from Helen Marshall, whom we just heard from. She was able to get the vaccine today. As frustrating as it may be, public health officials say it is important to continue trying to get an appointment. You should not have to pay out of pocket, although you may be asked for your insurance information. The Biden administration has laid out its plan to speed up vaccinations. That includes purchasing and distributing an additional 200 million doses of vaccine, deploying FEMA to operate up to 100 community vaccination centers, and expanding the number of people who can administer vaccines. But the administration said it may take through the summer before most Americans can get a shot. Given that and the emergence of new alarming strains of the virus, including one found in South Carolina, public health officials warn it is crucial that we redouble our protection efforts. William Brangham looks at the latest on both fronts.
Judy, there are now several troubling new mutants of the coronavirus circulating today. A few of them seem to make the virus more contagious. One of them, known as the UK strain, not only is more contagious, but now seems more likely to make people sick or to kill them. The CDC believes that that strain will become dominant in the US by March. Given these concerns, we wanted to look at the latest science about how best to protect ourselves.
The first thing to remember is these new variants, just like the initial coronavirus they come from, travel through the air. That's the main way people get sick. Someone who's infected breathes out the virus, and someone who's healthy breathes it in. Dr. Lindsay Marr at Virginia Tech studies airborne transmission, and she says the coronavirus can travel on small airborne droplets or even smaller aerosols.
Droplets are large, visible droplets that fly out of our mouths when we're coughing or talking. Aerosols are really just smaller droplets. They're microscopic, and we release hundreds of those for every one large droplet that might come out.
But according to Aaron Bromage, who researches immunology and infectious disease at UMass Dartmouth, not everyone who's infected spreads the virus the same way or in the same amounts.
And we know that some people have a lot more virus. And it's not just twice amount, it can be 100-fold or 1,000-fold more virus inside their mouth. And so those people with talking, with singing, with shouting, breathing for that matter, can release 1,000 times more of those viral particles into the air.
With these new mutant strains, it's not totally clear why they're more contagious, only that they are. This only reinforces the need for mask wearing. Numerous studies have now confirmed that wearing a mask can reduce the risk of transmission, but not all masks are created equally.
So virtually any covering over your face will deal with those large droplets. You know, a handkerchief, a bandana, they all deal with those large droplets in roughly the same way. But there is a big difference between the quality of the mask being worn and the ability to both filter the small little aerosols out on the way out and filter them on the way back in.
There's still a great deal of confusion about what kinds of masks offer the best protection. N95s are considered tops, but since they're still in short supply, many say they should be left only for frontline healthcare workers. KF94 masks, like these made in South Korea, are considered a good substitute. And while they can be found online, there are reports of fakes and counterfeits swirling around. So what's a consumer to do?
Unfortunately, there aren't any standards for masks right now. Those are coming, but it's going to be several months. In the meantime, what we know is that tightly woven cloth works better than loosely knitted cloth. 2 layers is better than 1. 3 layers is even better as long as it doesn't inhibit you from breathing easily through the fabric. If you really want to upgrade your masks, the thing to do is to look for a mask with a pocket or a middle layer where you can insert a filter. Things like a HEPA filter, a high-efficiency particulate air filter, work very well, block 99% of particles. The other thing you can do is to use a surgical-type mask, which filters really well, but probably doesn't fit so well, especially around the sides, and to layer a second mask on top of that, like a tight-fitting cloth mask, to help improve the fit and reduce gaps. That way you get both good filtration and a good fit.
One of the things that seems, I think, so difficult for people is that they go to shop for a mask, and it's very hard to assess quality or whether or not something that is a surgical mask or claims to be one is in fact one.
So we want to look for certification seals if we are actually buying, say, surgical masks. So the ASTM rating, 1, 2, and 3. A 3 is the best that you can get in regards to surgical masks. And then the FDA actually has a website that shows true from false, fake from real ones.
If masks are the first layer of protection, the second one is distancing. We've heard this mantra for months. Avoid crowds as much as possible, and if you're around others, stay 6 feet apart. But 6 feet isn't some magical number.
It really isn't a magic number. I mean, it's the closer you are, the more risk that you have. The analogy, which is not perfect, but it's a way that you can sort of think about it in your head, is if you're standing right next to a person smoking a cigarette, you're going to be inhaling a lot of that. It's the same with the virus. So 6 feet is just a good standard. It's easy for people to visualize 6 feet, but 10 feet is better, 3 feet is worse. And it's not this instant cutoff of distance.
This is why outdoor gatherings are recommended. Infinite amounts of fresh air swirling around will often disperse the virus quickly. But those sealed restaurant tents you see everywhere, not great. They're technically outside, but airflow is often minimal. Crowded indoor gatherings with people outside your family are by far the riskiest environments. There, if someone is infected, the virus can build up and linger in the air, and keeping your distance is no guarantee of safety.
You also want to pay attention to ventilation. But what you can do is just open the door or the windows, just a few inches, or a halfway open door can make a huge difference. And so that's one way that you can improve the ventilation.
With these new, more contagious variants spreading, public health experts argue this is the time to redouble these safety measures. That also applies to people who have been vaccinated, because it's not clear if the vaccine also prevents people from transmitting the virus. These precautions, they argue, will save lives, avoid more lockdowns, and could get us through the next few months until more people get vaccinated. Oh, and don't forget to keep washing your hands. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
It has been a week since President Trump left office, but House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was in Florida today to meet with the former president, where they agreed to work together to win back the majority. Out of power on Capitol Hill, the Republican Party is deeply divided on issues like the attack on the Capitol, the impeachment of Mr. Trump, and even his role in the party. For a check on the GOP divide, we turn now to Denver Riggleman, a Republican who represented Virginia in Congress up until earlier this month. He's now the chief strategist at the Network Contagion Research Institute. It's an organization fighting misinformation. And Whit Ayers, the president of North Star Opinion Research, a political polling group that has worked with Republican politicians, including Senators Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Hello to both of you. So good to have you with us. Denver Riggleman, let me start with you. What shape is the Republican Party in right now? How much power does President Trump still hold?
I think he holds a lot of power over the party. I'm here in Virginia and sort of central and south central portion, of this great Commonwealth. And right now, when you go down range, and I would say about a half hour south of here, I was down there just recently, and I saw a Trump-Pence sign. Well, Pence had been spray painted black, had been spray painted over with very crude language there. And I went into a storefront there, and really everybody in there was completely pro-Trump. And some weren't real happy with me. So what I'm seeing across the country, especially in committees, you're looking at Oregon, you're looking at Kentucky, you're looking at Arizona, you're looking at Georgia, you're looking at Michigan. I think right now what I'm seeing is that in certain districts, I think President Trump's going to play very well. And I think there's an advantage to some of these individuals who sort of grasp the stop the steal mythology and the messaging. And I'm seeing that down in North Carolina. I'm seeing that in other places. And even here in Virginia, you're having people already running on election integrity and stop the steal, Judy. So I'm not trying to sound, a pessimistic, bell here, but I don't think it's as bad as people think for people who supported President Trump. And I think people like me who are very angry about the Capitol riots might be in the minority right now.
Whit Ayers, are you seeing the same thing in the Republican Party right now?
Hello, Judy. It's good to be with you. The GOP is sharply split today between a governing faction and a populist faction. The governing faction has gained majority support in the past among elected officials and retains the dominant force among elected officials today, including people like Congressman Riegelman. But the populist faction predated Donald Trump, but Donald Trump expanded it and grew it to the point where it dominates Republican primaries today, although it has never gained majority support in the country.
So what does that mean right now? I mean, as we try to understand, Denver Riggleman, back to you, as we try to understand the place for, frankly, for truth, for fighting disinformation in the party, what happens to party members who are trying to do that?
Well, for me, I thought that, the use of sort of compassionate, blunt force facts would be some way that I could pull people back in. But if you remember my convention last year, I was hit with conspiracy theories. And even with my background in intelligence and fighting disinformation back to ISIS and back to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, it was interesting that I couldn't seem to break through on what facts and truth were. And I'm still seeing that today. I just got messages today, Judy, that said that I was still on the wrong side of things, that on March 4th, President Trump would come back and be inaugurated. And these are people that I know. And I'm wondering right now how difficult it's going to be to bring people back into the fold. And I think we had some that felt a little out of sorts after January 6th. I think they were ashamed of what happened to people like Officer Sicknick. But now with the silence from President Trump, what I'm seeing is there seems to be a small uptick in polling, but also in the open source data and chatter that we're seeing on what we can see. It seems that people are sort of buying back into the stop the steal, election integrity, and some of those conspiracy theories that have sort of spread and metastasized across the country.
So Whit Ayers, I mean, for me, the question is there a place in the Republican Party for traditional Republicans, people who don't buy into the idea that the election was completely fraudulent, that Donald Trump actually won?
We're going to find that out, Judy, and it's not at all clear that that's the case. Whether the GOP retains its uneasy alliance between the governing faction and the populist faction depends on some things that we don't know about yet. How is the Biden administration going to govern? Are they going to govern from the center, or are they going to get pushed to the left? How active is Donald Trump going to remain in politics in America? And will there emerge a Republican leader who can somehow split or appeal to both of the factions of the party? Marco Rubio gave a speech at Catholic University called Common Good Capitalism, where he said that corporate leaders have as much of an obligation to their workers as to their shareholders. That is an attempt to bridge the divide. We'll see if that's successful.
I'm asking you all this in part, Denver Riggleman and Whit Ayers, because just as an example, today, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz went to Wyoming, held a rally against Liz Cheney, who is in Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, but she's one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump. Let's just listen to what part of what Congressman Gaetz said today.
If you want to prove that you have the power, defeat Liz Cheney in this upcoming election, and Wyoming will bring Washington to its knees. Leadership doesn't mean backing a Nancy Pelosi fueled impeachment by reflex. You know, there's basically two things that Liz Cheney has done in the United States Congress: frustrate the agenda of President Trump and sell out to the forever war machine.
So, Denver Riggleman, in Liz Cheney, you have a very solidly conservative member of the Republican Party. Is she in real jeopardy here?
Absolutely. And, I've talked to Liz. Liz is a friend of mine, but Liz is tough. And I don't know if she's going to take kindly to Matt Gaetz, going to her home state. And, and she had definitely used the makeup analogy, but I don't think, he's going to try to beat rhinos, one one piece of mascara at a time. I don't think that's the way you want to go about it, is going to somebody's home state. But you saw how many people were there. There were hundreds. I think he had Donald Trump Jr. there, by the way, as far as over the telephone speaking about this. So you can see the Trump family is still very involved in politics. And the fact is, they got a grudge against Liz Cheney, Judy. I mean, they want to do this. And I do believe that there's going to be a challenge and a lot of money pumped into that race. I think you're going to see a lot of money pumped against Fred Upton. I think maybe Anthony Gonzalez. I think poor, Tom Rice, I think he's going to get hit too. So, I've talked to a lot of these individuals. They're not afraid. They're angry, but they do understand that there's a real challenge coming. And I believe Whit's correct. I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen here. But from what I'm seeing on the data, what I'm seeing on what people believe and what the committees and how they're voting, I do think there's a little bit of trepidation with people like Liz and the 10 that voted for impeachment.
Whit Ayers, you said so much depends, or a lot depends on how President Biden governs. But in the meantime, are you concerned that we could see more violence like what we saw at the Capitol on January the 6th? I mean, there's a warning out right now for the Department of Homeland Security about domestic terrorism. A man was found with explosives in his car threatening Governor Newsom of California today, Democrat. Are we headed for a period where we may see more violence, do you think?
Judy, you can't guarantee that we won't, not with the kinds of emotions that are out there. I mean, it's incredibly divisive when someone like Congressman Gaetz goes out to the home district of a leader of the Republican House caucus and attacks them. I mean, that just gins people up and makes them angrier. So I think we're in a very, very tenuous time, and it's really, really dangerous to be continuing to feed people lies and misinformation just to get them riled up.
It's disturbing to think about, but we thank you both so much for joining us. Whit Ayers, Denver Riggleman, thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Good to be with you, Judy.
There is a shortage of skilled tradespeople throughout the U.S. economy, a persistent problem that started well before the pandemic. But given high unemployment, it is an important time to explore what's behind that gap and what can be done about it. Paul Solomon has a story for our series, Work Shift, which focuses on navigating the job market in a post-COVID economy.
Superstar Seattle, where the high-tech young make six figures and up.
Okay, going in.
But you can make that much in low-tech too, says plumber Vinny Spizzari.
Drain cleaning, light plumbing repairs, and that kind of thing. We've got guys making over $100,000 a year.
Spizzari owns Seattle's Mr. Rooter franchise.
I've got plumbers that work for me today that make $200,000 plus a year.
And they're what age?
Any age, in their 30s, 40s.
Making $200,000 a year or more.
Absolutely.
That's because there simply aren't enough plumbers. Not in boom towns like Seattle, not anywhere.
Manpower is one of the most frustrating parts of my job, filling all the spots. I could hire 6, 8 experienced plumbers right now.
But they're just not out there?
They're just not out there. Guys that are my age, they're aging out.
But why aren't they being replaced with the young, given their historically low labor participation rate, made worse by the pandemic?
There were all these kids who either aren't working at all or are working in dead-end, low-wage jobs. Why can't you just say to them, hey, by the age of 25 or 30, you can be making six figures. Just come with me.
I would love to. I've gone to some career days. You know, the kids, you're waiting for them to come talk to you, and they just don't.
So why no takers?
First and foremost is the perception of plumbing. Got the cutters right here.
Oh, yeah.
Trevor Caldwell is Vinny Spazzari's right-hand man.
There's this stigma that goes along with getting your hands dirty. Just a plumber, not a person, just a plumber. And I don't want to be that guy.
Or that gal.
You're doing manual labor. Some people tend to look down on that. And that makes people not want to go into it, clearly.
Sarah Schnabel isn't a plumber, but an Ithaca, New York electrical apprentice.
Oh, there we go.
Another well-paying trade which can't find good help these days. A frustration for Schnabel's boss, Brian Lamort, and for his colleagues.
I know lots of guys in the trade who are contractors, and they're looking for help.
And willing to pay for it.
We've recently raised our rates as a business to $90 an hour, and we are not pushing the envelope. We were 75 a little while ago and 65 a little while before that. It's getting to the point where you probably pay us more to come fix your light switch than you do to go to the doctor.
So again, why no takers?
I do think for people my age, it's definitely more glamorous to think of the tech job where you're in a really nice, cushy office building. We're the kind of people who are going to hire someone to go change a light bulb, let alone go into the trades. That's kind of where my generation is right now.
I can't give them a power tool. They may kill themselves with it. They've never held a power tool in their life.
Yes, says Detroit master plumber Adrian Bennett, whose firm is currently helping to revitalize Michigan Central Station, it takes a non-cushy mindset.
This is physical work. You need to be there on your job site every day, and you got to be on time. And a lot of the young people today, they don't have work ethics.
But of course, plenty do. Determined to breed new plumbers, Vinny Spazzari runs his own year-long training program.
And then there's many options that you can provide.
Paying young people from the get-go to learn the trade.
We're paying our trainees $15, $16, $18 an hour. And then when you're done with the program, you're not a full licensed plumber, but you're a service technician who's able to snake drains and to do the kind of small plumbing repairs and whatnot and get close to that six-figure income. You're getting paid to learn that.
After a certain number of hours and possibly an exam, the requirements vary by locality, you can become a licensed plumber, a quality credential in an economy where only 11% of employers think colleges and universities are doing a good job of preparing people for the workforce.
Tighten everything before you hang that up there.
Says Spazzari of his apprenticeship program.
It's open for everybody. I would welcome anybody.
But, says Spazzari,
you'd be amazed at how many people we want to hire, but our insurance company won't insure them because of driving violation, drugs, can't keep a job. You see some applicants come in here in a ripped t-shirt, hasn't shaved. You go out and look at his car and it's full of garbage. It hasn't been washed in a month. Those are the things we look at.
But hey, plenty of young folks have intact t-shirts, clean faces, clean cars. Maybe they realize or learn that you need an apprenticeship to get licensed, says plumber Adrian Bennett.
And the apprenticeships are 5 years. And you start out at maybe $15, $16 an hour. And to get to that $40, $50 an hour, it's going to take you 5 or 6 years.
Plus, to get a job, isn't it who you know? And few potential candidates know tradespeople, it seems.
I didn't knew nobody.
Manuel Rios, a Mr. Reuter trainee, used to work on electric motors for $18 an hour, with little prospect of making much more. But by chance, he met some plumbers there.
They said that they make a lot of money, and I realized that the plumbing is never going to end because you're always going to need a plumber. So the business is always going to be there.
It's not resetting.
The final barrier to entry in the trades is a familiar one, says electrician Lamort.
There's a certain feeling that it's kind of like a white man's game, I hate to say it. So people who are LGBTQ, minorities, are a little bit intimidated by the boys' club that exists.
And of course, women. Added together, that's about 2/3 of the country. In the late 1970s, Adrian Bennett was recruited as a union plumbing apprentice under a federal program targeting women. Similar programs exist today.
This is something that will keep food on the table. It will keep clothes on your back. It'll keep a roof over your head. I'm living proof.
living proof as CEO of her own industrial contracting plumbing business since 2000.